you viewers, welcome to this production brought to you courtesy of Faume Media Productions. My name is Mr. Chikoko, also known as Chico Squared. And today I'm going to be discussing the Zimbabwe Schools Examinations Council, Zimsec, Ordinary Level Combined Science Syllabus. And today we are going to be focusing specifically on the biology section. So let's hit the ground running. In this lecture, we're going to be discussing the Zimbabwe Schools Examinations Council Combined Science Syllabus for Ordinary Level, particularly Form 3 and Form 4. Right. Combined Science is a subject that incorporates three subjects. It's actually three in one. We have biology, we have physics, and we also have chemistry. Right? So I'm going to start to discuss about the biology's syllabus, the biology concept of combined science. So on the board here, I've outlined the topics that are part and parcel of the combined science curriculum for O-level particularly. And the first concept we're going to be discussing is cell structure and function. So I'm going to go into details pertaining to what specifically is required as far as structure and function of a cell at Form 3 level is concerned. Right. So the first objective in our syllabus with regards to structure and function of a cell is to identify specialized cells. The definition of a cell and other organelles of a cell are covered in the junior certificate, the JC Form 1 and 2. So we need to identify specialized cells. And the specialized cells that we are going to be concerned about first and foremost is the red blood cell, also known as the erythrocyte. The red blood cell is responsible for transportation of oxygen in the human body and in the body of animals as well, right? And we're also going to be looking at the muscle cell, the palisade cell, and the root hair cells. So these are the specialized cells that we are going to be focusing on in as far as combined science is concerned. All right? So you are also required to draw and label the specialized cells. Okay? You're supposed to draw and label a red blood cell, a muscle cell, a palisade cell, and also a root hair cell. Draw and label. It's very, very important. And also, again, you are supposed to know the structural morphology in relation to the function of those particular cells. Like, for example, let's take, for instance, a red blood cell. You are supposed to discuss the structure in relation to the function of a red blood cell. For example, a red blood cell is a biconcave disc, non-nucleated, contains hemoglobin, and you also have to relate the structure to the function of those particular cells. I hope I'm being understood here. And also, you also need to observe these cells using a microscope, okay? Microscopic analysis of these cells is also very, very important. So depending on the resources that you have at your disposal, you can use a microscope, you can use a bioviewer, whatever is right. And also some of the suggested resources that we have in the syllabus on this concept: microscope, charts, bioviewers, biosets, right, printed multimedia and braille or JAWS software, ICT tools, and also prepared slides. So, ladies and gentlemen, comrades and friends, this is the first concept, cell structure and function. We are now moving on to the next concept, which is nutrition. Right, nutrition is the study of food, okay? So we have nutrition in two aspects. The first one is nutrition in plants, and the other one is nutrition in animals. So our syllabus requires us to state the factors which affect photosynthesis. Right, photosynthesis is a process whereby green plants manufacture their own food using sunlight as a source of energy and other raw materials as well. So you need to know the factors which affect photosynthesis, particularly water, light, carbon dioxide, and chlorophyll availability. Right, and we also need to describe experiments on factors that affect photosynthesis. Right, we said water is necessary for photosynthesis. We need to have an experiment that proves that water is actually necessary for photosynthesis. We have light, carbon dioxide, and chlorophyll. You also have to describe those experiments which verify the need for those raw materials in as far as photosynthesis is concerned. And also we need to know a simple experiment of testing a leaf for starch, right? And you also need to know that theoretically and practically as well. And we also have to describe the fate of the end products of photosynthesis, okay? Photosynthesis uses carbon dioxide and water in the presence of light and chlorophyll to produce carbohydrates and oxygen. So after those carbohydrates are produced, you need to know what happens to those carbohydrates. We're talking of things like translocation to various parts of the plant. Of course, we're going to discuss in more detail when we look at transport systems. And we also have to know what happens. Glucose is the first end product. So after glucose is produced, some is translocated and some is converted to other usable forms, other storage forms, etc., sucrose, starch, and other carbohydrates. Right. We also have to know the internal structure of a leaf. Okay. Internal structure of a leaf, if you still remember, we have the cuticle, upper epidermis, palisade, mesophyll, spongy mesophyll, vascular bundle, gut cells, stomata, etc. You also have to know those things. The epidermis, the stomata, the vascular tissue, the mesophyll cells, the gut cells, etc. And last but not least, you have to describe the leaf, the adaptation of a leaf to photosynthesis. We are talking of things like surface area. We're also talking of things like availability of stomata, like palisade cells, the air spaces, intercellular air spaces, the spongy mesophyll. You also have to know those things. So the activities and the suggested resources on this topic, right? You have iodine solution is required. It tests a leaf for starch. We have the leaves are required. A glowing splint. A glowing splint is used to test for the presence of oxygen. You also need a light source. You also need some aquatic plants like pond weeds. You also need sodium hydrogen carbonate, soda lime, which is also known as sodium hydroxide. You also need a microscope, a bioviewer, and also other ICT tools. Remember, we are in the 21st century. So ICT plays a very pivotal role in the 21st century. Right. After nutrition in plants, the next concept that you are supposed to know is nutrition in human beings, okay? So the first concept, which is of paramount significance, is the human alimentary canal. The human alimentary canal, also known as the gut or the gastrointestinal tract. The alimentary canal and its associated organs is a tube which runs from the mouth up until it reaches the anus. So you need to know the parts of the alimentary canal that are of importance. We're talking of the mouth, the esophagus, the stomach, the duodenum, the small intestines, the large intestines, the gallbladder, the pancreas, the liver. Right? You need to know the anatomy of these parts and also the physiology. The anatomy, we're talking of the structure, and the physiology, we're talking about the functions of all those parts of the alimentary canal. Or we also have to state the functions of the parts of the human alimentary canal. Of particular importance, we are talking about things like ingestion, digestion, absorption, assimilation, and also egestion. It's also very, very important. Again, on this concept of human nutrition, you also need to know the name and the types of the teeth and their functions, okay? There's a concept that I normally use when I'm teaching. It's called I Can Pass Mathematics. The parts of the teeth, incisor, canine, premolars, and the molars. You need to know the functions of those teeth, the incisors, cutting and biting, canines, tearing and gripping, premolars, grinding and chewing. Okay, it's also very important that you need to know those things. And it's also very important that you need to know digestion, the breaking down of large complex food molecules into small, simple, and soluble that can be absorbed in the bloodstream. So precisely we have mechanical digestion, also known as physical digestion, and we also have chemical digestion as well. So it's very, very important that you need to distinguish, to differentiate between those two types of digestion and also to state their significance. Importance of digestion, right? You're also going to be introduced to one of the new words that we have, enzymes. These are biological catalysts that speed the rate of chemical reactions, catalysis in particular. You need to know enzymes, the names of the enzymes, the substrates that they work on, and the products that actually come out from the digestion by those particular enzymes. And we also have to identify the end products of digestion. For example, carbohydrates end as glucose, fats into fatty acids and glycerol, proteins into amino acids, etc., etc. Right, the next concept after plant and animal nutrition, we're going to be discussing about the respiratory systems, okay? So the respiratory system basically is a system which deals with the taking in of air and the giving out of air, okay? So the first objective in our syllabus is to state the differences between inhaled and exhaled air. Inhaled air, we're talking about the air that we're taking in. Exhaled air, we're talking about the air that we're breathing out. So there are differences in terms of percentage composition of gases in those particular, in the inhaled and exhaled air. You need to know the percentage composition of gases, right? You also need to describe the role of the alveoli in gaseous exchange. The alveoli are also known as the air sacs. They are found at the end of the respiratory system. Just to refresh your memory, the respiratory system consists of nasal passage, trachea, bronchus, bronchioles, and the alveoli, which are found in the lungs, and the gaseous exchange, and also diffusion of gases, which takes place between carbon dioxide and oxygen due to those concentration gradients. It's also very important that you need to know those things. And you also need to explain how an alveolus is adapted for gaseous exchange. Particularly, we are talking of moisture, the thickness of the alveoli, the large surface area, and also the network of blood capillaries, which are also part and parcel of the alveoli. So the suggested resources and activities on this topic involve the following things. You need to read the resources that you need. Again, we're going to need an ICT resources. A skeletal model is also very, very important. A Visking tubing or an eggshell is very important for those experiments. We also need amylase powder. We also need protease enzymes. These are enzymes which digest protein. We also need catalase, an enzyme which digests hydrogen peroxide. It's actually found in fresh liver samples. We also need food samples. We also need reagents for food testing. Okay. We also need a model for the alveoli. We need lime water or bicarbonate indicator solution to test for the presence of carbon dioxide. Right. Next concept we're going to be discussing is called the transport systems in both plants and animals. Okay? Right. So transport systems in plants, we need to understand, number one, transpiration, the loss of water in plants. You also need to understand the factors. You need to state the factors which affect the rate of transpiration, all right, which include wind speed, humidity, temperature, surface area, light intensity, and the number of stomata. Right. You also need to measure the rate of transpiration in a plant, and we use what is called a potometer in the laboratory. It helps us to measure the rate at which water is being lost in a plant. We also need to outline the importance of transpiration. Why transpiration is important, water uptake and mineral ions uptake, cooling the plants, etc., etc., etc. Of course, we are going to be discussing in more detail in our future videos when we are looking at these concepts in more detail. Right. We also need to understand a concept known as plasmolysis and turgidity. Plasmolysis and turgidity, as you understand, there's what is called osmosis, movement of water from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration. So there's a concept known as plasmolysis, there's a concept known as turgidity, which involves water moving. If water moves inside a cell and the cell becomes saturated, the cell is said to be turgid. And if water moves outside the cell and the cell contents shrink, this concept is known as turgidity or plasmolysis. Sorry, plasmolysis or flaccidity. That we're going to be discussing that in more detail again. So the suggested resources for this I suggest that you need to watch videos or to watch simulations, video simulations on the plasmolysis and turgidity. It will actually make your comprehension more understandable. We also need to demonstrate plasmolysis and turgidity using potato stripes. I remember the previous year, is it 2022? There was an experiment in the examinations which involved those potato stripes and to identify, to demonstrate plasmolysis and turgidity using those potato stripes. Next concept we're going to be discussing about is the transport systems in humans. So transport systems in humans, we're talking about how the blood circulates, okay? So we're going to discuss the double circulatory system of the blood. We have what is called the pulmonary and the systemic circulation. Remember, the pulmonary circulation involves movement of blood from the heart to the lungs and back to the heart. And the systemic circulation involves movement of blood from the heart to the rest of the body and back to the heart. So you need to distinguish, to differentiate between those two things. You also need to understand the structure of the heart, the structure of the blood vessels, etc., etc. Right. The next concept we are going to be discussing about, which is also one of the most interesting concepts for most of the students, is known as reproductive systems. We're going to start with the plants. Of course, most students like the reproductive systems on the human aspects. But the first one is the reproductive system in plants. So reproductive system in plants, we are going to be discussing first and foremost the structure of a flower. Remember, a flower is a hermaphrodite. It consists of the male part and the female part in one position. The male part known as the stamen, the female part as the carpel, anther, filament, stigma, style, ovary, ovules, etc., etc. The differences between a wind-pollinated and an insect-pollinated flower is also very, very important. And the suggested activities involve, one, drawing the structures of the wind and insect-pollinated flowers, and also examining the structure of wind and pollinated flowers. You also need the plant specimens, multimedia and braille resources for those who are blind, and also ICT resources are also of paramount significance. Right, germination is also very, very important. You need to describe the process of germination. You also need to know the conditions that are required for germination, like for instance, moisture, oxygen, etc. You also need to investigate the conditions that are necessary for germination, and you also need to calculate the percentage germination. So some mathematics will be involved in calculating percentage germinations. And then we now move on to the next concept, which is reproductive systems in humans. So reproductive systems in humans involves first and foremost to know the functions and the structure of the male and the female reproductive systems, okay? And then you also need to describe the structure and function of sex cells, also known as gametes, okay? So sex cells, we have the sperm and we also have the ovum. You need to know the structures of those particular sex cells and to be able to draw those sex cells as well, okay? You need to describe the route of the sperm from the testis to the ovum, okay? And the testes are responsible for producing the sperms. We have the testis, the epididymis. We also have the sperm duct. We have the prostate gland, the Cowper's gland, the urethra, and the roots. Those sperms take after ejaculation into the female reproductive system up until they reach the oviducts for fertilization. You need to know those things, okay? You need to be familiar with the terms like epididymis, sperm duct, urethra, vagina, cervix, uterus, oviduct. I know from all these terms, the vagina is more familiar with most of you guys. Right. Then you need to define fertilization. Fertilization is also very, very important. Okay. You need to describe the menstrual cycle and the hormones that are involved in the menstrual cycle. We're talking of hormones like progesterone and or estrogen. Of course, when we're looking at pure biology, we'll be discussing more of these hormones like oxytocin, etc. But these are the more important ones that we need to be discussing. And in the menstrual cycle, it's also very, very important. We need to understand ovulation, menstruation, etc., etc. Right. It's also very important that we need to describe the roles of the placenta. Remember, the placenta is the one which is actually the bridge between the maternal and the fetal, the mother and the fetus, which is growing in the uterus. So this is where we have nutrients passing from the mother up to the fetus, and we also have waste products of metabolism coming from the fetus going back to the mother for excretion purposes. Nutrients, how they travel, waste products, how they travel, antibodies, oxygen, how they travel. I also suggest that you need to watch video simulations of how the placenta operates, and if you go on YouTube, there are numerous videos, simulations of these processes, right? And then the last concept is health and diseases, okay? So health and diseases in combined science form 3 starts by what are known as sexually transmitted infections or STIs. We need to list the sexually transmitted infections: gonorrhea, syphilis, chancroid, genital herpes, okay? We need to describe the signs and symptoms and the effects of gonorrhea, syphilis, chancroid, and genital herpes. We need to understand and we need to state the causative agents for these diseases. And you need to also know the names of those bacteria, the causative agents. Like, for example, gonorrhea is caused by Neisseria gonorrhoeae, and we also have syphilis is caused by Treponema pallidum, right? You need to know the names of those bacteria which are responsible for those diseases, right? And we also have to state the control methods and the treatments for those STIs. We're talking of abstinence. Of course, it's difficult. We also talk of condoms. We also talk of other preventative methods that we can use to prevent those devastating sexually transmitted diseases. Right. We also need to understand malaria, typhoid, Ebola, and cholera. Okay? You need to know the signs and symptoms of those diseases, right? And you also have to know how they can be prevented and how they can be treated. Okay? Again, on health and diseases, we need to describe the smoking or the effects of tobacco smoking on health. Okay? We have emphysema, bronchitis, lung cancer, low birth weight in smoking mothers, etc. Of course, the tobacco industry is a multi-billion-dollar industry, but we also have to know that there are diseases that are associated with that multi-billion-dollar industry as well. Right. It's very important that we need to describe the effects of excessive consumption of alcohol, right? Particularly, as you know, the liver is the detoxification organ which processes all the poisons inside the body. So there are diseases like liver cirrhosis, and there are also social implications of excessive alcohol consumption, like breaking down of families, lack of judgment, domestic violence, accidents, etc. So we need to discuss those social implications and how we can reduce those effects. And also we have drugs like mandrax and cannabis. Cannabis is also known as marijuana, right? And we have things like hallucinations, addictions, okay? This is a very, very important aspect, especially on a Zimbabwean context, because drug abuse is very, very rampant in our society, particularly drugs like crystal methamphetamine, right, known in street lingo as mutoriro, dombo, etc. We need to understand those effects of those particular drugs, particularly hallucinations, addictions, and breaking down of family structures, etc. And also, we are going to be discussing and outlining the effects of breathing solvents. We have solvents like glue, some even smoke petrol, okay, for so that they get high. I don't know what getting high is. And damaging of muscles, the heart, and addiction. Okay, so suggested activities and notes pertaining to those concepts. We can do some case studies in the community, take some drug addicts, interview them. They will explain why they're taking those drugs, the effects that are getting from those drugs, etc., etc. Ladies and gentlemen, this is the biology section of Combined Science. I want to thank Faume Media Productions, Boss Kingston, and the crew behind the scenes. So in the next lecture episode, we're going to be looking at the chemistry and the physics sections. Be sure to like and subscribe our channel. Be blessed and stay blessed. This is your host, Chico Square. Thank you very much.